This is a story about the most disturbing thing that ever happened to me while delivering pizzas in high school. There's a few others, but this one, it stands out above all the rest. I was 16 years old at the time and just got my license, so I needed to pay for a car. A few of my good friends were working at a local place downtown that sold pizzas, so I decided to apply for the job and got it without even having to interview because I was so short-staffed. They also hired me as a delivery driver without even checking to see if I had a license or not. I did, but I always thought it was funny. About a month or two later, we were having a really busy night and I was sent off as a delivery guy into a fairly nice place on the other side of the town. This was before GPS was common and not very reliable, so we still used maps to locate the houses. This particular house was in a new development, so it wasn't listed on any of our directories, but my boss did think he knew roughly where it was, so giving me directions. He was way off, so I had to call the house for directions and things started to get a little weird. The conversation that we had on the phone was normal. I told the man I was near his house but needed directions because the one I was given wasn't very accurate. He was very understanding and told me how to get there from the road that I was on. A few minutes later I pulled into his driveway and instantly got a bad feeling. This was a man in his early 50s or 60s and was standing in the middle of his driveway. He was creepy to say the least. He had some satisfied smile on his face and he was wearing a maroon silk bathrobe. I got out of my car and gave him his 10-inch Hawaiian pizza, which cost $10.95 at the time. He gave me a 20 and told me to keep the change. Well, considering I was late on the delivery and had to call the customer for directions, I really wasn't expecting this. Heck, I couldn't believe I was getting a $10 tip. I drove away from the delivery thinking that something was off, but I got a great tip. I was happy. I lit up a smoke and turned up my radio when I felt my phone vibrate. It was the house that I was just at. I got nervous thinking it was going to be a complaint or something bad because why else would you call the delivery guy who just given you your food? My blood cold at the words that came out of his mouth. "Do you want to come back over and get the knife?" he said, or at least that's what I heard. I had said nothing and hung up the phone and drove back as fast as I could to get to work. As I called one of my friends who was working there at the time, I told him what had happened. On the 5-minute ride back to work, he called me at least 3 or 4 more times. For some reason I actually answered one of the calls and he asked me if I wanted to come over after I got off work and spend the night. When I finally got back to work, I was greeted by laughter from pretty much everybody working there. Everybody thought I was either faking it or overreacting. Then I got another call on my phone from the exact same guy. I showed my manager while the phone was ringing and let it just go straight to voicemail. That's when he decided to call the restaurant. Once this happened, my manager finally realised that this was probably a serious situation and answered the phone pretending to be me. He had a very short conversation with the guy and at the end told him that he's not allowed to do business with us ever again and blocked his number. When my boss hung up at the end, his face was pure white. He looked like he could barely comprehend what had just happened. I asked what the guy actually said, but my boss would not repeat the words that came out of his mouth. I was so paranoid that I had to stay with my friends that night instead of going home. Guess who called later? Yep, and it was at least 10 times now. For at least a week or two, I was living in fear of being kidnapped. I was always looking at people or cars that were going around me, just paranoid, expecting that I was going to be watched or followed. It's possible that I was right because the phone calls, they started happening again. This is when I decided that it was time to go and call the cops and put an end to all of this. I explained everything to the police officer and he assured me that they would take care of the situation. Turns out the cops did nothing. I live in a low crime town of less than 20,000 people, but that didn't do anything to put my mind at ease. This guy didn't have anything else to do that day except write some speeding tickets during the afternoon and some DWIs in the evening. The calls, they kept on coming in and my paranoia grew. This needs to stop. So I told my boss that things hadn't improved and he called the cops himself. An officer came down to the restaurant and took down our statements. Unlike the other officer, this man was visibly shaken and angered by the events that had happened. He promised that he would personally handle the situation and I didn't have to worry anymore. The police officer would follow up on what he had said, however, and I never heard from that creep again. I had kept the same job for about 3 years and had nothing else but great times there. However, creepy silk bathrobe weird guy, let's never meet again. Following story happened to me when I was 19 or 20. I was an attractive and petite female. I was at a beach near my house in the middle of the day, but it was early May and about 60 degrees out, so there weren't too many people out there, maybe 2 or 3 on the beach. I was by myself, sitting on my towel reading a book when this man came up to me. The man was probably in his late 30s and early 40s, fit and what most people would consider attractive. He sat down on my towel and asked me what I was reading. I was already freaked out that a stranger would come up to me and sit on my towel, but I answered. He kept asking questions like my name, age, where I went to school, and all of them weird things that you wouldn't really expect a stranger you've never met before to start asking you. All of a sudden, he came right up next to me. Then he put his hand on me. I screamed and ran the hell out of there. Luckily there was someone else right on the beach who looked over to see what was going on, so he didn't chase me. I ran back to my car that was in the parking lot about half a mile away. There were no other cars there. I then looked around and didn't see the man anywhere. I assumed my scream and the other person had scared him off. Fast forward 1 or 2 days later, I get a letter in the mail without a return address. I immediately went straight to the police with the letter in a plastic bag in case they wanted to look for fingerprints. I told the detective about him touching me and all the other weird things he said. The detective said he couldn't do anything because there was no evidence of a crime, but offered to call and scare him. I agreed and he kept the letter. I'm assuming he called the man that day and told him to leave me alone because I never heard from him again, but I was sure that I saw him following me in a car shortly after. After I ran away on the beach, he must have either followed me back to my house or gotten my license plate. How else would he have got all that information about me? But everywhere I looked, there were no cars behind me when I left or anywhere near the car park. I was paying extremely close attention too. How he got all this information I don't know. I'm just thankful that he stopped stalking me. What's a stylus, you ask? Well, it's a small pen that's in the Nintendo DS system to use on the touchscreen. Well, when I was 13 years old, I decided to be a cool dude by buying a white stylus to pair with my black DS. Since all the black DSs came with the black stylus, I figured that it was pretty genius to have such a mismatch. Not only that, I strongly believed that this stylus gave me good luck in the games I was playing. Sure, you might be rolling your eyes at me, but I legitimately did find myself winning all the time. Anyway, one day it was lunchtime at school and I'm outside playing a multiplayer DS game with my friend, and we usually like to do so on nice afternoons. Teachers like to get on our case about playing video games in the lunchroom or library, so We went to a section of outdoor picnic benches that was not too far away from the school grounds to avoid disturbances. It was located right by a convenience store as well. On this lunch break, my friend decided to go inside to buy some chips and drinks. I decided to stay outside and play some more to get ready for our next match. Not even a few minutes later, a man walked out of the store and generally into my direction. He must have noticed my DS and asked me what I was playing. As I replied, he advanced towards me, looking at my game. As he did, I decided to describe my recent accomplishment and setup. I even pulled out my lucky stylus to show him, explaining how that it helped me win any battle. He then explained how his house was just down the road and he wanted to show me all of his video games that he had collected. While it sounded very cool to meet an adult with the same interests as me, lunchtime was about to end and I didn't want to be late. He promised me it would only take a few minutes if I went down a nearby alley, and being so naive, I agreed. We weren't even a few minutes down when I realised I'd left my lucky stylus on the bench. When I was showing the man, I must have placed it on the bench instead of inside my DS. This was a really bad habit of mine and it was a miracle that I hadn't lost it upon this point. Before the man had the chance to react, I ran all the way back to the bench to get it. As I got there, my friend had just come out of the store trying to find me. As I put my stylus back into my DS, he asked where I'd gone and I told him how a man had came by and offered to show me his video game collection and that he lived just down the alley. It was at that moment that my friend told me that there were no houses down the alley. It just led to a trail that went deep into the woods. I didn't really let it sink into me at that moment how much danger I could have been in. I didn't even become suspicious how the man had just disappeared when I looked back for him. Looking back on it now, I was very fortunate to have left my stylus there. This all happened about 3 years ago. I have worked at a state-run mental institute for about 5 or 6 years now. All the patients who come here are court-ordered. We don't do self-admittance here, so we get the most high-profile local criminals that are out there, and they're all either mentally challenged or ill, or need to be screened because they're claiming they are. This place houses around 300 to 400 patients, so after you've worked here for a few years, it's pretty common to bump into someone who has been released, especially being a smaller town. Normally, it's pretty chill, a simple wave from a distance or "how are you?" As employees, we cannot legally approach them in public, but they can approach us. On this complex we have 4 buildings, a women's facility, men's short-term care and maximum security, and one for sex offenders. 3 years ago I decided to move. I found this great big house, the rent was cheap and it was fully updated and had so much charm and character. But the neighbourhood was kind of iffy. My husband at the time, we've since separated, would always sit and smoke out on the porch with me. For a few weeks I would randomly see or hear him talking to someone, a man. He looked kind of dirty, like he didn't change clothes or had a much dirtier job. I'm assuming that he was a neighbour. I didn't think anything of it. One evening I went outside to call my husband in for dinner after putting our 1-year-old son down to sleep, and the man freaked out when he saw me. "You remember me? You remember?" I'm sorry, who are you?" "Nah, you remember me. Nobody forgets this face. You worked in that asylum, I know you did." Yeah, I worked there. Were you an employee or a resident?" At this point, he gets angry. He started screaming at me, not remembering his name, and goes into a full psychotic episode. He was rambling and screaming about the demons that still talk to him, but as long as he drinks, they only whisper. How the squirrels are watching him, trying to keep him out of danger. They're friends and they don't want to see him getting into trouble. They have his back and he's never going back to the institute. Suddenly he starts yelling at the squirrels to be quiet. After he's done having a word with the squirrels, he then starts focusing on me again, talking about how I'm here to take him back. But how that he's never going back. He starts screaming more. I get my husband inside, tried to de-escalate the situation. He was having none of it. He was convinced now that I was sent by the institute to bring him back. I locked my door and instantly called my co-worker for advice. He looked the guy up and he had been a resident in the max security but was non-violent for the majority of his stay. A week or two goes by with no sign of him, but I found traces everywhere of him randomly. Some paper and gibberish written on it, drawings, sticks arranged in some really weird shapes on my porch. I would randomly get that being watched feeling when doing yard work, and I would promptly go inside. This all finally came to a head when I saw a shadowy figure across the street watching my house. I decided enough was enough and I called the police. The institute looked into his case and found his work number, and my supervisor also got informed. He was gone before the police had come, but after some time his caseworker tracked him down. I have since moved on from all of that, but that man is still out there somewhere, probably still unmedicated and not receiving the proper care that he needs, because let's be real, this man obviously needs help. I'm just hoping that he never returns to